Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. My name is Arlene Sachs, and this is Sally Ann Sachs. And today we're going to talk about the different Soundex systems that one can find. Anybody who's used the archives certainly is familiar with NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration, knows the term Soundex.
The first thing somebody says to you, the first day I went to the archives, I think the first thing that they said to me was, you will need to learn how to use the Soundex. Do you remember that? And they have signs all over with the Soundex.
Let's take a look. The purpose of it is to...
The purpose was the spelling problem. How do you look up names, right? They're spelled all different kinds of ways. So some bright guy by the name of Russell, early in the 20th century, got the idea of clustering names by how they sound, not how they're spelled. And he devised a code, and the National Archives uses that code, and we call it the Archive Soundex, but it's really the Russell Soundex.
Well, it all started because, like, years ago, maybe the person was illiterate, and the clerk would write down their name. So they would write down what they heard. If they heard Sachs, it might be S-A-X, might be S-O-X, might be S-A-C-H-S, S-A-K-S, lots of different versions.
Please. Yeah, in fact, Arlene, did you know that spelling didn't become standardized in Europe until very late in the 19th century?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I thought it was about yes, but I know.
And our relatives, I mean, there's a great story in our family about this immigrant relative of mine. Her daughter told me the story. They took the name Weinstein. It wasn't their real name, but they took the name Weinstein. And the teacher called up one day and she said, Dora's lovely, but she spells her name a different way every day. How do you spell Weinstein? And then Dora laughed and said, what did my mother know from spelling?
Yeah.
I didn't know how it was spelled either.
Yeah, so, it wasn't important to people until 20th century.
Right.
So if you code ours, let's take a look at the Soundex system itself. When you code ours, either one of ours,
at the National Archives.
At the National Archives, we'll start with that one. You have the first letter of your name, which in our case is the S. And then
you don't use the vowels.
And the CH or CK, well, H isn't used at all, so the CK would be 2. And then if you have repeating consonants like another S, you don't use it, and that becomes S200.
Right, so they have only 4 positions in the Soundex at the archives, a letter and 3 numbers. Actually, I'm going to tell you something I only learned Friday. Did you know that the National Archives actually has 2 Soundex systems?
But which do they use on what?
It's so funny. Somebody at the Immigration Service told me this story. The archives apparently purchased from Russell, who has it copyrighted, his Soundex for use in the census. That's what it was used for. Well, then the Immigration Service has sent over old records to the archives. He kept working on his Soundex and improving it, and the Immigration Service bought a later, more improved version. So the material that comes from the Immigration Service has a different Soundex. It's a later version of the Russell Soundex. Don't ask me what it is, but apparently some man discovered it and has been writing articles about it and making a lot of noise about it.
Well, we need something better than that anyway, because it certainly doesn't work for the Eastern European names.
Just think. Your last name, look at the H. In an Eastern European, the reason H isn't used is that it doesn't have a sound. It's like snow, the W. The W is silent. And in any Eastern European or Middle European names, think of the W, the V, or the H is H. You know, I mean, you have to have that sound.
Yeah, so it didn't work for any kind of long names like Augenfisch or
or any names that had certain letters, not only long, but names that had the W where the W should not be silent.
Yeah.
You know, any name where it was a V sound, really. And so what happened was, early in the development of Jewish genealogy, I can even give you the exact year, we were in Jerusalem in 1984 having our first conference there. We'd gone out to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, and we'd looked up pages of testimony, the memorials. Gary Mokotov, who I had not yet met, was sitting next to me on a bus going from Yad Vashem to Tel Aviv to another museum. And he had a page of testimony. And he said, oh, I said, oh what? Well, he is looking for the name Zuckerman. In the U.S., it was Z sound, but it could be a TS sound if it was Hebrew, you know, Zuckerman.
Yeah.
Well, in the Yad Vashem page of testimony, it started with a C. And you could see, Gary, you know, used to work for IBM. He was one of their first hires. You could see his mind just going like this. And he said, oh, all those sounds come out with can have different letters. Randy Deitch was there too. He had been working on it independently. They got together and they compared notes, and that's when the Deitch Mokotov Soundex was born.
Well, that's certainly famous now.
It is.
Let's look at a sample of the Deitch Mokotov, and we have that on the screen now. And you can see a bunch of different names, all becoming more or less Greenstein or Greenstone in the United States.
And also, I don't know if that's a good example, but the thing that's really important is the ones that would not code properly if you coded them at the National Archives. That was the absolute motivation. Randy had already discovered that the names weren't coding properly. Yeah. So this one, yes, will code on the system, but the thing to remember is that if you take certain names and use the Deitch Mokotov Soundex and the National Archives Soundex, you'll get totally different clusters.
Well, the Deitch Mokotov Soundex is completely different anyway because it uses 6 numbers instead of just the letter followed by 3 numbers.
Right.
And so it really comes out completely different. It's very complicated.
Complicated? Oh.
Well, it took 2 pages. It's too much to put up on the screen to show anybody in that sense. Yeah. I mean, you just have to follow through on what it says if you know the rules.
If you know the rules, they're very easy to remember. You don't use the vowels again. And the thing to remember to tell people always is that don't tell me how your name is spelled. When you're talking about genealogy and immigrants from Europe, just say it. Let's hear how it sounds. And in fact, Deitch Mokotov has been so useful that it's widely used now.
Oh yeah, by Stephen Morse and the Holocaust Museum.
And Jewish Gen uses it. Yad Vashem doesn't use it, but they have their own system. But most of the databases, not just Jewish databases, but databases that deal with Eastern Europe and Central Europe, find it very useful. And so it's widely used.
But then there's still a few problems that come out, and that's not necessarily either system, but that's because you're reading handwriting.
Well, there's a lot of problems.
You've got this marvelous example of Yentis.
Yeah, remember David Yentis was one of the first members of our genealogy society, and he was a volunteer at the National Archives. And he knew very well where his family was living in New York City in 1910. And why could he never find them in the 1910 census? And he was
looking at the census index.
He was soundexing, and he was looking for his family in that census, and they never came up, and they never came up, and this guy was going wild. He would talk about it at all of our meetings, and finally one day, he said he was down at the archives, and all of a sudden, it came to him out of the blue. You know what came to him out of the blue? He said...
It was written in a German form.
Well, he didn't say it was written in German. He said, if somebody read that handwriting wrong, how would they spell it? It wouldn't be Y-E-N-T-I-S. It would be Y-E-U-T-I-S. And in a minute, there it was.
And this is still true today because the German handwriting, the U looks like the N. And what looks to us like a W is really the German M.
And you learned it how?
And there's 2 others that are, to me, upside down, and that's their U looks like our N, and their W looks like our M. And I learned it the first time I went to college, and the first letter I got from my mother.
Who was born in Germany.
Who was born in Germany, still wrote the letters the German way. And I had the devil of a time until I learnned that I always have to turn those 2 letters upside down.
Oh, is that so funny?
So that anybody that's indexing something, let's say ship arrival records, the captain was German, he would have written the letters.
It wasn't the captain, it was the clerk.
Oh, well, wherever, okay, then they left from Hamburg, the letters would have been the other way around.
Yes.
And so you got a lot of problems with that.
With the handwriting.
Even here, though,
it's also, you know, careless handwriting.
pretty-
Do you know that you can take David and
Daniel.
Daniel and they look the same? And
Sure,
you
because
can write,
the V could be the
And
because the N and the ID is the IEL. And I've seen that with my own. I have a David and I have a Daniel, and I've
Oh, how
seen it with their
funny.
own handwritings that I sometimes have to take a second look at it because they're so easily.
well, see, the fact is that even though we have the principle of soundexing, I mean, the basic principle is you're going to have a system that helps you find names, right?
Yeah, but let me give you one other example.
Okay.
And this is something that happened
yeah.
a number of years ago. It was on Jewish Gin. Somebody put down an example. Somebody told me my ancestor's name was Ophelia, and this just doesn't make sense. It doesn't sound Jewish. There's nobody with a name anything like that. And I laughed when I saw it. I knew exactly what it was.
Instantly you knew?
I knew it because look at the screen now and you'll see, if you read it quickly, it looks like Ophelia, but it's really Sophie. The O, what looks to us like a modern O, is really the S. Then your little squiggle is the O, and it's a PH, and the H has sort of a loop behind it like the old writing. American writing, too, has the H like that, and Sophia. And the last name is Selig. On the screen, a little tiny piece of the O is missing. But the name was really...
Did anyone besides you write in with
I
the
don't
answer?
know. I wrote directly to the person, I think, and sent it to her. But that particular example is my husband's
Well, one of mine,
great-great-grandmother.
I mean, it's legendary now. It's unfortunate. The Ellis Island database is a wonderful thing, except it is so riddled with errors that can never be fixed that I don't know what we're going to do about it. And they're needless, which is really aggravating, because the original plan supposedly was to start with the later years when the arrival records were typed, in the hopes that then the volunteers would become familiar with the spelling of names. Well, the evidence is they didn't do that. And so you had these volunteers out in Utah who didn't know Eastern European names. And Riga, the city of Riga,
Yeah.
it comes out as Piga, P-I-G-A. Now, how are you going to, you can't fix that with a Soundex, not easily.
Yeah.
These are what's called graphical errors, not sound errors, but errors in the recognition of the graphics.
Let's look a little bit more at the H. Mogotov Soundex, and Alexander Bader talks about the problem you've just mentioned, and he's an expert on linguist, and he has an article
On
in
names. He's a linguist who's an expert on names. Yeah.
In the latest edition of Avotainer, so we've relied heavily on what he's written there. Let's take a look at some of these names that come out the same coding, even though they're very different in the names. It's Baj, B-A-J, and F-A-U. There's nothing similar with them. They both come out with 7
Right, in the
zeros.
sound. What's happened is he's saying there are limitations to the H. Mogotov, and this is an example of the second limitation. The first limitation is the fact that H. Mogotov is written only with Roman letters.
Yeah.
And we have Cyrillic, we have Greek, we have Hebrew. We have other letters, Chinese. But also we have what's called false you might call it false positives, where it clusters together variant names that are not variants of one another at all. They have no relationship to one another.
Well, if you're looking at a list and you come out with 50 or 100 names, it's not too bad to look through those.
Not if you're doing it manually.
Yeah, well, let's say you've looked at a list and these are the names you come up with. You can look those up and you can
Figure it out.
Go further. The problem will become when we try to get more and more databases together, as we're doing.
It's it's my big project right now. That's
Is
what
to
we're
put all of
we're
the
having.
databases together.
In fact, Bader is coming to the United States for 2 days. There's going to be 5 of us sitting in a hotel room for 2 days to work on this problem. Because the point is that we're trying to develop software that will take, say, the Yad Vashem database, which has 3 million names, and the Ellis Island database, and merge them in such a way that you can then begin to build family trees, because
You'll find the names that belong together.
Right, but you have to be able to know that this person in the Ellis Island database is the same person as that person in the Yad Vashem database. And one of the problems
well, they can't be. The Yad Vashem.
Well, no, but the name of the parents. I mean, there's lots of things. So, for example, do you know how many names, how many variants of the name Isaac?
Oh, yeah, they're like...
nobody believes this. How
1,250 names?
1,254 variant spellings of the name Isaac in the Yad Vashem database of 3.5 million names.
And part of that, I think, is the transliteration from the Hebrew, transliteration from Russian or Polish or whatever.
People who...
But just look at English. I-S-A-A-C, I-Z-A-K, I-S-A-K. I mean...
Well, we tried to make as many as we could, and I saw one yesterday. This is from Poland.
Oh,
Poland in the early 19th century. J-I-C-E-K.
Yeah, that would be it.
That was Isaac.
Yeah, because the J was often used as an I, too.
That was part of what I mean about spelling wasn't standardized. It's a major issue. So the question that we, for the ordinary genealogist, of course, is to watch out for these, what I'm calling graphical errors, where an error has been made because of the shape of the misreading of the graphics. And in fact, Bader even writes about typographical errors.
Oh, well, there's certainly lots of those, too, because, when you're typing fast, you reverse 2 letters, or you hit the letter next to it, or many things like that.
Or you're tired of typing in lists of names, yes. But you also had come up with some other really good examples. You found some good examples from Hebrew of problems with
again,
Hebrew.
that was something Bader had, and that there are at least these 4 letters, which he mentions off the top of his head, that are read different ways. And the first one is the letter B.
Or V.
Or V, depending on whether it has the dot in the middle or not. And the same with the P or F, the T or the S, and the
sin or the shin,
depending on which side the dot is on. That's fine if you put the dots in, but most people in Israel today don't bother with the dots anymore.
No, not at all. What I was told was that the children in first grade get primers that have dots. You see, if you put a dot in, then it's a B sound. Okay, and I remember learning this letter down below, which they also have in the Cyrillic alphabet, the sin or the shin. You know how I learned where the dot belongs? Sin is never right. So when the dot was on the left, it was a sin, and when it was on the right, it was shin.
And then down here, I have just one Hebrew name, and that can be a lot of different letters because you don't know where the vowels go.
Here's the significance of this. Years ago, the Search Bureau for Missing Relatives, which is part of the Jewish Agency, which has huge database, it wasn't a database then, a huge number of names, got a grant to digitize its system. Well, all these names were in nice European handwriting, European spelling, Roman letters, right? So the databasing is being done in Israel, so what happens?
It becomes Hebrew, and then you don't know where the vowels are.
Then there are no more vowels, so now you have a name that can be Berg, Barag, or Brag.
And it can be anything because we don't know what the original was.
We don't know what the original name was. Yes, it's most frustrating. Everybody just tears their hair about that. Somebody's going to have to go back and
if they still have the originals, at least in that case, they can go back.
Right.
But with the Yad Vashem pages of testimony, which we've mentioned before, but let's go over that again. It's a page that a family member or neighbor or relative filled out after the Holocaust for somebody that presumably had died. And what they're finding now, since they're indexed and that we can get at them, people are reuniting with family after 60 years.
Right, but there was Bader is very complimentary. He's very tactful about the Ellis Island database. I was so impressed. English is his 3rd language, and he was so tactful. But he says that the Yad Vashem database is just the best he's ever seen. They've managed to do a Herculean job of reading all this different kind of handwriting. And he points out also that you transliterate from one language to another, you go from the Cyrillic, somebody's translated it into the Roman letters, and then it goes into Hebrew letters. And so again and again, you get these odd spellings.
Well, I think when you guys work on your database, you're going to have to try to see anything that hasn't been transliterated yet, set up a set of rules for your transliterating so that they're always done in the same manner rather than...
That was the other thing he pointed out, that we're getting material now from Eastern Europe, and people are transliterating it. Some do it very systematically with rules like the Library of Congress has a set, and others just do it haphazardly.
What it happens to sound like.
And they may even in their own set one day do it one way and one day do it another way, and that's a lot of how the clerks did it in Hamburg.
Of course.
And of course also the thing to remember is that the clerks spelled it in the German way. Yeah. So you get CHs when the Russian name had an S. I mean, you get SCH. Schwartz was SCH. Wouldn't have been spelled that way in Russia.
Would have been just SH?
SH, just a shin,
Yeah, that would be completely different sound in German. It would be Schwarz.
Yes, but you see, they added those CHs instead, where there was just an H, and lots of other things like that. So for the average genealogist, what do? Well, you learn the Soundex at the National Archives. You know that if you're going to use immigration material at the archives, you get somebody there to explain the difference to you.
And you try to remember and find out any other kinds of things like the U and the M's.
Well, and if you're doing Eastern European, you learn the rules of the Date Mokotov Soundex, which you can find online easily. Yeah. And if you're really, really into it, this spring 2007 issue of Avotenu, Some Issues in Ashkenazic Name Searches by Alexander Bader. Now, I know you said you got lost. Well,
I found it very, very difficult to follow because I'm not a linguist, and he's
you don't have to be a linguist. You're a retired computer professor. He's talking about how to design software.
Yeah, but he's talking about diphthongs and
oh, you do have to know what a diphthong is. Okay,
and things like that. That if it's this. Or if you have the vowel,
you just have to read slowly and carefully. This is.
It's a lot of good information.
It's either bedtime reading if you want to go to sleep, or it's not bedtime reading if you want to know what he's saying, because it's very easy to zone off on it. But it's really key because you can go way down the wrong path by misreading a name. Or thinking it's a name that it isn't.
There's one other example, and that's not even handwriting, and that's the German old printed letters, the Gothic letters.
Oh, yes.
They are incredibly, look, again, it's on the screen, the A and the U, there's a little tiny thing that's different. The one that drove me up the wall was the K and the R, and I'm looking at the capital letters. The K and the R, the K has a little tiny extra, I think it's the K, it might be the R. One of them has a little tiny extra line over it, and if you're looking at old material, an old newspaper of something, that part might have faded, and then you can't tell the difference. The B and the V are identical.
Well, I do know that people have written primers on how to do this, how to translate.
Well, this came from, I think, the Mormon Church, like the handout thing on how to read the
right. You would have to. You would have to because you just, and also the other thing is the familiarity that comes with using the material over and over.
And how see, if you know the language real well, then you know it has to be that. If you don't know the language too well, then you have to try it one way. No, that doesn't sound like a word. Then you try it the other way.
Well, that's why we have the problem with the Ellis Island, because people in Utah don't know Eastern European names, so they had no intuitive sense that
this could not be.
Right, that my grandfather Gedalia, who's listed there as Gellis, Geldis. I don't know, and that he came from Piga.
I mean, how did you ever find him?
I knew when he was coming, the ship he was on, and I just went down line by line.
Oh, so you went through the ship. You did use an index then.
Oh no, well I take it back. With him, they had the Amder correctly.
Oh, okay.
They did the last. So then I looked at this first name, and I just thought, if somebody didn't know his name. This is the problem. You're not going to know that you're looking at something that's wrong.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
just like that Ophelia and the Sophie, if you know how to read the German, and at that point I had learned a little bit, and I had that particular name in the family, so I'd seen it. It was obvious to me what it was. But
and a little bit, and also that person who wrote in had enough sense, enough background to know that Jews weren't giving their kids the name Ophelia.
Yeah, it just didn't match.
It was like when I ended up looking for Harry Solomon at the archives, and I kept getting English farmers, only my immigrant had come from Romania. And finally I said, dummy, no Jew arrived in the United States with the name of Harry. It was a name he took after he got here. So then I looked for Chaim or Tzvi, and I found him right away. But you just have to end up with some sense of the context. Otherwise, because I guess what I'm saying is don't take this stuff as gospel. It's not, for sure. It's helpful, but it can mislead you. So you have to be careful.
Well, I think that this Vader has done a marvelous job in sort of paving the way for the next generation of Soundex system, of the next generation of computers to help you find the right one.
Just before we quit, I want to just give you, I edited an article that's going to be in the summer issue of Avotenu. A man in New Jersey did a very clever thing. He was looking at early 19th century Polish records, and they didn't have last names, and he wanted to infer the last name. He just used the Excel program and used sorts, and used a feature called autofilter, and used wildcards. And he clustered together all the Isaacs, like the J-I-C-E-K, and all the variants using that, and ultimately he was able to find all the people and their names.
So that's what you'll eventually have to do in the computer program.
But even, he's not a computer person. Even if you have an Excel program, you can
but
do.
you have to have those names
Right,
somehow in a computer form, in your own computer in order to be doing
he was going to the Mormon library and copying names and putting it in.
Yeah, that's an extensive way.
Yeah.
Well, I hope we've told people something about the problems with indexing.
Yes, and soundexing. Yes.
Soundexing, yeah.
It's not simple. I don't know where I can borrow. Do you know any place I can get one?